Welcome to this week's Concurrency Beer 30. I'm Nathan Loznoski, Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer, and with me this week is Juliana Scheer. Juliana is a business analyst with Concurrency. Welcome, Juliana.
Yeah, thanks, glad to be here.
Welcome. And what kind of beer are you drinking today?
I'm drinking a Coors Light.
A Coors Light.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
What about you?
This is Oktoberfest. It's October, but it is snowing outside.
I know, too early for the snow, in my opinion.
Exactly. And you and I have something else in common. You are also a Marquette grad.
Yes, go Marquette.
Go Marquette Business School.
Yep.
And lacrosse coach?
I played lacrosse there. Yep.
Lacrosse.
Yep.
Wow, that must be pretty useful for heavy hitting VA work.
Yeah, right. Definitely.
Get out of my way.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about how companies can engage in their journey to the cloud, specifically around when they're looking at migrating applications from their on-premises state into the cloud state. And you've done quite a bit of work now on working with companies that are doing that study, evaluating what they can do and what makes sense to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear from you about how you go about doing that. You know, how do you evaluate those workloads and determine what makes sense and what doesn't make sense?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I feel like there are a lot of moving parts when you're looking at these migrations that you want to do, because you want to try to move all the applications from on-prem to Azure if it makes sense. There's different ways that you can do it. You know, you can do the classic lift and shift where there's not really much that you have to do the application. You just take it and you throw it up there. Then you have the refactoring and re-architecturing where you're rebuilding it or adjusting something, messing with the VMs, playing with things that are already up there in Azure. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. With building plans though and how to go about doing it, you have to look at the applications as a whole. So it's not just one application. Most apps have multiple environments, which then we kind of break that down into almost different applications. When you look at the wave plan, you don't move them all together, right? You want to separate those environments. So recently we've been doing a project where there's 100 some applications, and each environment, we broke them out into how many environments does this application have, and how many VMs are there, and how many DNS connections, and then from there we broke it out into the easier applications, which had less environments and less DNS connections. Move those first, and then the more larger and complex ones down at the bottom. So.
Got it. So when you did that wave planning against the applications, how did you prioritize which went first versus which went later in the wave planning? You know, was it on business priority? Was it on getting your feet wet on some simple applications first? Was it building the muscle memory and the talent of the operational team? Kind of tell me about that.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. You have to start somewhere. It's a lot easier to start with something that's smaller than to take on the most complex and biggest application that has the most environments and try to move that first. There are usually a lot of kinks that you have to work out in the beginning of the process and understand, how are these going to work when we move them. So you want to start with smaller, less complex ones, move those up first and work out the kinks, and then adjust as you go along, and then start with the bigger ones at the end.
Got it. When people are thinking about the decision of whether or not this is something worth moving, when they think about it in terms of maybe cost or on suitability or connectivity, what are the things that you've seen are the biggest sort of blockers that you're working on clearing, or the ways in which they're looking to adjust applications to be able to adapt around cost, or things of that nature? What are you seeing them doing?
Yeah, sometimes it just doesn't make sense to move it to the cloud. It's going to be way more costly for them, I guess, rather than cost efficient. So in that case, it's more around the recommendation of, hey, we don't think it's a good idea to move this. Could we? Yeah, sure, but it's not going to make sense in the end. There are a lot of different factors that you have to look at when doing that, so I think it just depends.
Got it. As you've been organizing the efforts, what has been the best practice in terms of how much time you give application teams to ready their applications? As you prepare a T-minus 90, 60, 30, whatever that plan looks like, what have you seen work?
It It depends on the timeline that the company itself has. So a lot of times they're crunched in a period of time where they have to move their things by a certain deadline, and therefore we have to push up the process itself. There are a lot of risks and blockers involved in this, especially when gathering data to be able to move the applications. App owners aren't the easiest to always get a hold of,
Yeah,
and they don't answer very fast. So we tend to build in a lot of extra time to allow gathering those resources and giving enough prep time for our team to be able to move the stuff in a successful way.
Got it. You might even split out the environments, right? So like if you have one app that has 3 environments, you might do environment 1 in one way and environment 2 in another way, so you can gain some experience there.
Exactly. Yep. So usually depends, but dev is the easiest environment to move. So starting out with those are smaller, like prod instances. Those are easy to move too. So starting with the smaller ones, and the production, they can be a bit hefty, so we usually keep those towards the end, especially with the more complex applications. So yeah.
How are you measuring the cost delta? You know, you think about what it looked like on premise, what it looks like in the cloud, and then optimization exercises. You know, how have you been helping the customer to understand what that cost is going to look like, and or that potential optimization might look like post-project, you know, for them to take a follow-on effort?
Right, so there are tools in Azure that you can use to produce a lot of those graphs and comparison charts and data like that, and we actually have a few interns on our team who have been doing that for a few of our projects to display to them, hey, this is the cost of what it will cost in total to move this application to the cloud and run it on a monthly basis. So they use a lot of the tools that are built up in Azure to be able to assess that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you find like you've run into a number of learnings in that space, you know, where there's been an optimization or a change where you've said, wow, like if I would have known this when I started, I could have probably brought more optimization or better suitability or something like that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I feel like there's a lot of learning that comes with this stuff. There's a lot of moving parts, so learning all of those, and I think getting brushed up on that would help too, to gain confidence throughout the project.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like part of the migration process, or maybe another way to say it is, what do you feel like the upskilling is for the teams that are in the customer environments? You know, is there an app team that's moving into an Azure environment, as you're the infrastructure team that's supporting that app team in the customer environment? How much of the migration plan is tied to their upskilling versus just the timeline to move the app?
A lot of it. There's a lot of like back-end stuff, and then yeah, it's up in Azure, so you don't necessarily have to maintain it anymore, but just being aware of what's going on with the applications and the environment up there. So.
Got it. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was, you know, the timeline for migration is dependent on the business's needs. You know, what are some of the scenarios that you've run into where that's caused that difference in the timeline? You know, that's impacted it.
Right. So a lot of it can be budget. How much money do they want to throw at it? Do they need to get it done by a certain timeline? If then we need to add more resources onto that. Do we have those resources to throw in there? All of those different aspects really can push a timeline one way or the other. Sometimes it could be a fiscal year end, so they want to get it done by, if their fiscal year ends in November, they want to get it done by then. Well, if we're starting in January, that's going to be a crunch timeline. So looking at all of those different aspects.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. When you think about putting together the wave plan, you know, what are the blockers that you need to clear in that wave plan for an application to move that you've seen? Like, you know, if I just decided tomorrow I want to migrate the application, I probably couldn't do it, right? I have to clear blocker 1 and blocker 2 and blocker 3. Like, what are examples of those blockers?
Yeah, so right now working on creating what's called questionnaires. So building a list of questions that the app owner needs to fill out about their application, asking them a list of various questions, details of the application that the team would need to know in order to move that to Azure. So you can't just, like you said, hey, I want to move this, like boom, it's up there.
Let's go.
There's a lot of background that needs to be done and completed, and a lot of assessment too. Like, is it ready for Azure? We can run those Azure readiness assessments and see, hey, are these VMs and machines ready to be moved or not? There's a lot of technical work that goes along with it too. So the migration prep itself is the biggest piece of the migration. Cutover is just one day. So it's all of that leads up to that is the most important part of the process.
Awesome. Completely different subject, but something I'm very interested in. Both of us having come from Marquette, me probably significantly longer ago than you. What was something from college that you experienced that prepared you to enter into doing this kind of work? You step out of the college experience, you enter into the professional experience, and it's got a lot of things that are different. There's some things that might be the same. I'm kind of curious, what prepared you to enter into this?
Yeah, so I think playing a sport in college really played a difference in how I go about doing things now. No day was the same, and there were tons of different obstacles that were thrown at you. Like, for example, I remember this one practice, it was at 5:30 in the morning, and it had snowed the night before, and they didn't have time to shovel off the fields, and so we had to physically, 36 of us, shovel the entire field so we could practice. And it's just being on your toes all the time, being open to learning new experiences, being open to doing things that you might necessarily have done before. I think lacrosse really prepared me for that. So, yeah.
Does that translate, you think, into the transition that's happening in the technology space in general? I feel like for the last 20 years, technology has been pretty much the same, but now it seems to be moving into a new phase where some of the things that, in particular, the IT industry have been doing is transitioning to a new spot, and people are having to be prepared to do something they hadn't learned before. Are you seeing that in the way that people are having to get re-educated, or that you're educating yourself in that transition?
Yeah, I think for sure that's true. Everything's going to change tomorrow, essentially. What we're using today is going to look different a month from now. Technology is always changing, and now with where we're at in that space, I think in the world in general, it's just rapid. It's changing really fast, and everyone's going to be needing to be open to change and to learning and to trying to better that space. So.
Awesome. So one last question.
Okay.
What makes you love getting out of bed every day to do this kind of work? When you say all right, I'm doing this. This is something I get up and I do it, and I deliver something. What makes you say, yeah, I love doing this. I love this kind of work.
Yeah, I think consulting is just really fun. No project that I've been on has been the same. Yeah, I've worked with some of the same tools and same spaces, but each company that I've worked with is different, and I get to meet people outside of our organization every day, and it's really awesome to be able to gain those experiences along with the people that we work with internally. So it's awesome.
Awesome. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on Concurrency Beer 30.